On March 9, 1974, a Japanese soldier emerged from the jungle on the Philippine island of Lubang. He was wearing a tattered World War II uniform, carrying a rifle that still worked, and he refused to believe the war was over. His name was Hiroo Onoda, and he had been fighting alone in the jungle for 29 years, nearly 3 decades after Japan surrendered in 1945. He'd survived on stolen food, rainwater, and the absolute conviction that his mission was not complete. He'd killed 30 Filipino civilians and police officers, burned crops, and engaged in firefights with search parties sent to find him. Leaflets had been dropped from planes telling him the war was over. Relatives had pleaded through loudspeakers. Newspapers were left in the jungle showing modern Japan at peace. Onoda dismissed it all as Allied propaganda. He would not surrender, not until his commanding officer, a man who'd been living peacefully in Japan for decades, flew to the island and personally ordered him to stand down. Only then did Hiroo Onoda lay down his rifle, salute, and end his personal war. This is the story of the last Japanese soldier to surrender from World War II. Hiroo Onoda was born in 1922 and trained as an intelligence officer in the Imperial Japanese Army. In December 1944, at age 22, he was sent to Lubang Island in the Philippines with orders to conduct guerrilla warfare and never surrender. His commanding officer, Major Yoshimi Taniguchi, told him explicitly, "You are absolutely forbidden to die by your own hand. It may take 3 years, it may take 5, but whatever happens, we'll come back for you." Onoda took those orders literally. When American forces invaded Lubang in February 1945, most Japanese soldiers were killed or captured. A handful escaped into the mountains. Onoda was among them. They formed a small group, surviving on coconuts, bananas, and stolen rice, conducting raids on Filipino villages, convinced they were still at war. In August 1945, Japan surrendered. Leaflets were dropped on Lubang announcing the end of the war. Onoda and his men found them and decided they were fake psychological warfare designed to trick them into surrendering. They burned the leaflets and went deeper into the jungle. Years passed. One by one, Onoda's companions gave up or were killed. In 1950, one soldier surrendered after deciding the war must be over. In 1954, another was shot and killed by a search party. By 1972, only Onoda and one other soldier, Kozuka, remained. They'd been in the jungle for 27 years, living like ghosts, raiding farms at night, hiding in caves, convinced the war was still raging and that Japan would eventually retake the Philippines. Then, in October 1972, Kozuka was killed in a firefight with Filipino police. Onoda was alone. For the next 2 years, he continued his one-man war. He was now 50 years old, still wearing his rotting uniform, still carrying his rifle, still following orders given in 1944. The Japanese government sent search parties. They dropped letters from his family, photos of modern Japan, newspapers showing decades of peace. Onoda ignored them all. He'd been trained to resist psychological operations. He believed everything was a trick. He would not surrender until ordered to do so by a superior officer. And his commanding officer, he believed, was dead. In 1974, a young Japanese adventurer named Norio Suzuki decided to find Onoda. He traveled to Lubang and hiked into the jungle unarmed, calling out that he wasn't an enemy. After days of searching, he encountered Onoda. They talked. Suzuki explained the war had ended 29 years ago, that Japan had rebuilt, that the emperor was still alive. Onoda listened, but refused to surrender. He said he would only accept orders from Major Taniguchi, his commanding officer. Suzuki returned to Japan and located Taniguchi, who is now a retired bookseller living quietly in Japan. Suzuki convinced him to return to Lubang. On March 9, 1974, Major Taniguchi, now an old man in civilian clothes, hiked into the jungle and found Onoda. He stood at attention and read the official orders. "You are relieved of your duties. The war is over. Surrender your weapons and return home." Onoda saluted, tears streaming down his face. He handed over his rifle, still functional, still oiled and maintained his ammunition, several hand grenades, and his sword. He had followed his orders for 29 years. Now finally, he could go home. Onoda's return to Japan was surreal. He'd left in 1944 during the height of the war, when Japan was a militaristic empire. He returned in 1974 to a pacifist, democratic, economically booming nation. Tokyo was unrecognizable: skyscrapers, cars, neon lights, a society that had moved on completely. He was treated as a hero by some, a relic by others, and a war criminal by Filipinos who'd lost family members to his raids. The Philippine government considered prosecuting him for murder, but President Ferdinand Marcos pardoned him, recognizing he'd been following military orders. Onoda struggled to adjust. The Japan he'd fought for no longer existed. The values he'd been willing to die for, loyalty, duty, sacrifice, seemed irrelevant in modern society. He felt alienated, lost. In 1975, he moved to Brazil and became a cattle rancher, finding peace in the isolation. He later returned to Japan and started a nature school for young people, teaching survival skills and discipline. He wrote a book, No Surrender, My 30-Year War, which became an international bestseller. He never apologized for the killings, saying he'd been a soldier following orders. He died in 2014 at age 91. Hiroo Onoda's story raises uncomfortable questions. Was he a loyal soldier or a fanatic? A victim of indoctrination or a man who chose to ignore reality? His refusal to surrender for 29 years is both astonishing and tragic. He lost 3 decades of his life to a war that had ended, killing people who were never his enemies, living in a jungle while the world moved on without him. Some see him as the ultimate example of loyalty and discipline, a man who kept his word no matter the cost. Others see him as a cautionary tale about blind obedience and the dangers of ideology. The truth is probably both. Onoda was a product of Imperial Japan's military culture, which valued death over surrender and taught soldiers that their lives belonged to the emperor. He internalized those values so completely that even overwhelming evidence couldn't shake them. He needed permission from authority to stop fighting. Without it, he would have died in that jungle, still at war, still following orders given by a government that no longer existed. What makes Onoda's story even more remarkable is the sheer physical and mental endurance required. 29 years in the jungle, alone for the final 2, with no contact with the outside world, no confirmation he was doing the right thing, no hope of reinforcement or victory. Just duty. He survived malaria, tropical storms, injuries, and the constant threat of capture. He maintained his rifle and equipment for 3 decades, kept himself combat ready, and never lost his tactical discipline. Military historians consider his survival one of the most extraordinary feats of endurance in modern warfare. But it's also deeply sad. Onoda gave 29 years of his life to a mission that had become meaningless the moment Japan surrendered. He could have had a family, a career, a normal life. Instead, he lived in a cave, eating stolen food, fighting a war that existed only in his mind. When he finally returned to civilization, the world he'd known was gone, and he was a stranger in his own country. His story is a testament to human endurance and the power of belief. But it's also a warning about the cost of never questioning orders, never adapting to new information, never allowing yourself to change. Today, Hiroo Onoda is remembered in Japan with a mixture of respect and discomfort. He represents a Japan that no longer exists, militaristic, rigid, willing to sacrifice everything for duty. Modern Japan has moved on, embracing pacifism and democracy. But Onoda's story still resonates because it asks a fundamental question. What are you willing to sacrifice for loyalty, for duty, for a mission you believe in? Onoda sacrificed nearly everything. And when he finally laid down his rifle in 1974, he did so not because he changed his mind, but because he was ordered to. That level of discipline, that absolute commitment, is both inspiring and terrifying. It shows what humans are capable of when they believe completely in something. But it also shows the danger of belief without reflection, of loyalty without questioning. Hiroo Onoda fought a 29-year war that existed only in his mind. And when it finally ended, he had nothing left but memories of a world that had vanished. He was the last soldier of World War II to surrender. And in many ways, he never truly came home.